Hey everyone, True here, and it is time for a new data-based Evertale arena tier list taking into account over 100 of some of the best teams worldwide. After the massive tier earthquake in the last edition, this time it is more stable, but there's still plenty of changes to talk about. Before we go through them and the top tiers in more detail, first a quick look at the newly introduced units. And we start with an absolute banger. The new light Cinderella just has an insane damage output per time units, and on top of that, really strong survivability. She pretty much has only one single tiny little weakness, and more on that later though, because she is going to one of the top tiers. And moving on to the next unit, we also see Sleeping Beauty move on to one of the top tiers. She is the unit that introduced the cursed sleep mechanic, although she has a bigger weakness than Cinderella. More on that later when we go through the top units. We also see Angel Reset, who isn't long enough in the game for sufficient data on her, but she will definitely have a harder time than the two aforementioned units to actually get to one of the top tiers. At the moment, I don't see that happening, to be honest. Dark really still needs a boost because light is now the strongest element in the game and dark by far the weakest. Now from these high flyers we go back down and we go through the tier changes, and we start with two unfortunate news. We see the two dragons or machines, Altairion and Orzakron, go from F to the graveyard tier. F in the chat for them, or rather G in the chat. Really unfortunate to see them fall down that low, but unsurprisingly so, because Stun is now having a really hard time after that flare up in January, or rather at the beginning of the year. So no big surprise there. Altairion with the stun skin and Orzakron with the stun entry, both of which are no longer as relevant. And then we also see Gaia go from E to F tier. I was never really a fan of Gaia, to be honest. Even at her release, she was really underwhelming, and now even more so now that I guess the kind of armor mechanic also got nerfed with the Cinderella release, and in general there's just not much going for Gaia, so she's joining the F tier for now. The same unfortunately is true for Artimaya. She has that Spirit Plus and Thunder entry. We talked about her quite a bit in the previous editions. I still think very good unit, especially considering that she's off banner. But the same thing that is true for Altairion and Orzakron is true for her. The kind of stun entry mechanic is no longer as reliable, and we will see that going forward as well. Then we see Mortar Alira also fall from E to F tier, which is interesting because the Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella both kind of help sleep in some way. But if you consider the cursed sleep mechanic, Mortar Alira with the Nightmare Drain actually is more suited, or even better if she's with normal sleep, because one of the advantages of the cursed sleep from Sleeping Beauty is that normal anti-sleep attacks don't wake up the unit regardless, so the Nightmare Drain of Water Alira isn't as required, I would say. On the other hand, what is interesting is we see Water Rolosha rise from the G tier to the F tier, and that way she is actually going away from the graveyard tier and seeing some usage again. And for her it is kind of nice to have that kind of cursed sleep, because her Nightmare Hunter, her normal Dream Hunter skill doesn't wake up the unit but still produces a lot of spirit. Then we also see Clarice go down, another sleep unit that is going from E to F tier. She has the Sleep 2 mechanic, which costs 5 spirit at this point, rather outdated or way too expensive, and so that is a given. But that is it for the F tier. In the E tier, we see a few joiners from above, aka units that have fallen a bit in true power, and one of them is Fire Callan, kind of this outdated survivor unit. She has the Purify Heal, the first one of its kind, but back then it was really good. It costs 1 spirit. Nowadays the standard is already 0 spirit Purify Heals, so not even that is going for her anymore, besides the point that her survivor's armor is also rather useless nowadays. And another old unit that is falling in favor is a Dark Reset. So the first Dark Reset, let's see if the new Dark Reset, the Angel Reset, can help these poison units stay relevant at least, or be used in a few teams, because at this point Dark Reset, for example, is down to 4% usage. Angel Reset, of course, a much better unit, but another poison unit, Shootin' Daoji, is also going down from D to E tier. So you can see a pattern here, these dark poison units really down bad, and I'm not sure if Angel Reset can do enough to lift them up further again. There probably needs to be another release for a change in the favor of poison units, honestly. And two other units that are also going from D to E tier are Light Mysha and Tiamat, both kind of spirity units. But I mean, Tiamat from the get-go nerfed by the Lancelot release, and it's not getting much better. And on the other hand, we have Light Mysha, who is still problematic. I mean, she has the Hold Ground Plus going for her, but yeah, any unit that is potentially helping the enemy, that not just in niche scenarios, is a problem. And Light Mysha, for example, Vigor launching back someone like Bright Ludmilla or potentially Storm Michaela is just not gonna cut it anymore. Now, after all this sad talk, moving on to the D tier, and here we have some positive news for one unit, and it is Fire Antares going up from E to D tier. She's a fire unit, she's obviously benefiting from the Commander Astrid rise in burn units, and you will see a pattern here going forward. But yeah, Fire Antares, one of the benefactors, I suppose, and rightfully so, now up into the D tier. Still not into top 5 burn units, obviously, but she is an option again. And on the other hand, now back to the back to the more negative news. We see a few units falling from the C to the D tier, one of which is previous number 1, I think, even from 2 years ago. We have Dark Snow White, who is definitely a starter unit based on her skill set, but there's just no space for her in the starter platoons anymore. There's just so many better options at this point, and Blood isn't really in fashion. Her stealth mechanic isn't really helping her survive as much anymore, and so it is really no wonder why she is 10% down, or rather down to 10% usage. And she's not the only one with that. We also see Dark Ossia, another dark unit, have the same fate, and she has kind of more mechanics of staying alive and healing and everything, but very obviously it is just not enough in today's meta, and the only way to make her more relevant is definitely to have Blood and Poison become more relevant again. And then we see Sakura, which is a bit surprising, and she also has 10% usage in my SSR world rankings. And it is a bit surprising because she could be a bit of a counter to the kind of cursed sleep, but there are even better counters for that, so I think this is one of the explanations. Because of her Purify passive, she could be a counter to the Cursed Sleep, but Burn is a better counter against it. Now moving on to the C tier, we see the Storm Anya drop from the B to the C tier. One of the best, or rather the best unit at the start of Evertale 2.0. She kind of changed the game with the auto barrier, with the temporary guard mechanic and her retribution train, but nowadays she oftentimes just dies rather quickly, and also the burn revival certainly isn't doing her any favors, given that she oftentimes depends on her hold ground to stay alive a bit longer to actually get off that retribution train. And another Storm unit also joining the C tier is Ossia, who is one of the oldest units, still keeping above 1 million true power. Very impressive stuff from her. I mean, she still has the Hold Ground Plus going for her, but now with the Cursed Sleep, Hold Ground Plus is a bit nerfed on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's just more and more stun immunity introduced, or stun wards introduced into the game, and so her flip stun random isn't as potent as it was. And the same is true for another Storm unit, and we see Storm Relosha go down to the C tier with that great entry effect and also step back so she can do it again, and also the combination with Storm Jeanne and Storm Michaela quite nicely with the revival. All of that is fun and games as long as you are not facing a stun immune burn team, which is getting more and more common. And even units like, for example, Sleeping Beauty have that kind of stun immunity in their skill set in some way or shape or form, and that is why Storm Relosha is now down to the C tier, still 31% usage though. And another unit that is falling, we just had 3 Storm units, and we are continuing in the pattern of the previous falls in the other tier. We now see Dark Alice, unfortunately, go down from B to C tier. She is that kind of poison unit with the counter mechanic, but too restricted in her time units, which is now becoming even more apparent when you look at a unit like Cinderella. And Cinderella really easily actually can take out Dark Alice, maybe even within just one time unit, because of that hold ground mechanic that she can basically hit again. And overall, she's just too restricted. I mean, now we see Dark Reset or Dark Angel Reset getting introduced into the mix. Let's see if it will help Dark Alice in any shape or form, but I wouldn't get my hopes up too far just yet. If you want to get your hopes up about some units, then at the moment those units are clearly the Fire and Burn units, and in that case we see Fire Mirai now go from C to B tier, and getting interestingly quite close to her original form, to the Light Mirai, who for a long time even stayed in the top 10. But now she's also joining the B tier, so Light Mirai is down. We see that kind of stun revenge obviously also being nerfed further and further. Not only are there so many units now that ignore revenges, passive revenges, but on the other hand we also see stun immunities, so a lot of units can easily take out Light Mirai, and then her kind of gimmick of staying alive and giving turns, etc., and producing some spirit isn't as relevant anymore. I mean, she's still very popular in the last platoons with 64% usage over all top teams, but it's not enough. We see Fire Mirai with 18% usage, but Fire Mirai is having much better impact, or a bigger impact in general on the game, starting right in front in burn platoons and pushing up players much further, while Mirai apparently doesn't do a whole lot of difference for the players that are using her. Another light unit also down to B tier from A tier is Mizuchi, and she is struggling for many of the reasons we have already discussed. Yes, she is a very good ending unit in your arena platoons, but at this point maybe the game is already lost, and if she is facing some of these burn units, if she is facing some guards on the enemy team, then she is just having a very difficult time. Her Grand Armor now is even kind of helping the enemy in case she does it with the Cinderella around. So all in all, Mizuchi is falling, still with 50% usage, but the trend is clearly negative. The same cannot be said for Light Hibiki, and it is a bit interesting, honestly, that she is rising from C to B tier here, but one of the explanations that I can think of why that would happen is her banish skill becoming more relevant again, with now the kind of starting platoons relying on many very strong units that, if taken to the back of the enemy team, are rather helpless potentially. Even like if she banishes, for example, Commander Astrid or a Cinderella or a Sleeping Beauty, any of these units, then the team structure of the enemy team could very well be significantly less potent. We are getting closer and closer to the very top tiers, but two units that are no longer immediate part of that conversations anymore are Dark Jeanne and Water Colon, both of which are going from S to A tier with 64 and 63% usage respectively. Dark Jeanne, of course, she has a struggle with all the revenge ignoring attacks. It has been discussed many times, but I think at this point probably her biggest issue is that for 300 time units she is just kind of poisoning enemies or even attacking them with a weak poison devour attack, and so Dark Jeanne just can't do as much. One thing that is actually helping Dark Jeanne, which means her fall is a bit slowed down, is that some of these newer units actually do not ignore revenge anymore. The revenge ignoring stealth attacks are a bit pushed back, and it's rather more about ignoring counter stands and things like that. So Dark Jeanne can have still some relevancy, but for that it would also be nice to have dark units rise further. But for now, but keep in mind that is before Angel Reset enters the rankings, she is still the strongest dark unit, which is of course very bad news for dark. On the other hand, we see Water Colon. This water unit with the Hold Ground Plus is still, I think, pretty good. If I have to choose between Water Colon and Dark Jeanne, I mean, I'm still using them both in my F2P team, then I would use Water Colon. She has that kind of mechanic with the Imposter, which is quite interesting still in some constellations. It's not quite a banish, but it can significantly take potentially apart a team. And another thing that is helping her a bit is now her element with burn on the rise. That kind of water element is finally becoming more interesting again. Regardless, she is falling a bit because in some situations she will not be able to do all that much. And then we have another fire unit going into the other direction, and it is Fire Elmina going up from A to S tier. Her burn stun entry is basically nullifying the effects of Sleeping Beauty, for example, with the Thorns mechanic, and she is pretty much as set in the 5th position of a burn platoon, and the burn platoon 1 is kind of getting really meta right now in the top servers. So fire Elmina here, a clear pick for the 5th position for that kind of strong entry effect, and so that explains why she is rising to the S tier. Even though she only has a usage of 42%, her impact seems to be great for the teams that are using her. Some bad news on the other hand we see for Earth Ossia, and that is all kind of connected with that kind of burn rise, because obviously Earth Ossia with her passive kind of not applying to burning units is also a bit struggling with that kind of thing with the burn around. I mean, she has some mechanics of staying alive. For example, if she doesn't die due to an attack immediately, then she does get the stealth status and survives instead of, you know, burning to her hold ground and then just dying. So there is some good stuff there, but on the other hand we see the counter being nerfed yet again by some attacks like the one from Cinderella, and so this is not really helping her. And on the other hand, Earth Ossia has been a great counter, especially against some of the dominating Storm units like Lancelot, like Storm Jeanne, even Storm Elmina, who is still relevant, Storm Ludmilla, Storm Antares, Sun Wukong, but all of them are not exactly rising stars at the moment, and so her elemental advantage at her release is now kind of becoming an elemental disadvantage because of that rapid rise of fire due to Commander Astrid's release. So then, looking at the top tiers, you might ask, why is Commander Astrid only going to SS tier? And I think the answer for this is in the data. I mean, yes, we do see that the strongest platoon right now is kind of a platoon 1 burn team, but that's in the name here. We have the team, the burn team, and burn teams haven't been really great for a very long time, and so I think that kind of slowed her adoption. Maybe some of the top players even skipped her because they didn't think she would bring burn back quite as much as she did, and so she's still at 48% usage only after a few weeks have passed. But still, I mean, honestly, very great unit if you are running burn. She is probably the best unit around right now. She is single-handedly lifting up that kind of burn meta again with the kind of passive effects that she has, with the permanent stun immunity, with granting her team all the time these kind of status effects of burn, of enrage, of quicken. Like, all of these things are going in her favor, and that is why she is SS tier. She is being held back by being a burn unit, but in a weird ironic way, I guess this is also helping her, because if you are running burn, then it is now your time to shine, especially against the teams of another unit that is joining the SS tier, and that is Sleeping Beauty, the new Earth unit with the Thorn mechanic, with the Cursed Sleep mechanic. And Sleeping Beauty, honestly, a very good unit. And if we didn't see the Commander Astrid release maybe 1 month before her, and instead 1 month after her, then I think she would have just smashed the SSR World Rankings, honestly, because she is so good against everything that isn't burn. But the problem is that burn is rising, so that is why Sleeping Beauty is actually held back a bit. I mean, you can still use her in the later platoons, or on some servers where burn is just not prevalent, you can even put her in front. But this is really an interesting unit in terms of it's the first unit that is so incredibly strong but has such an incredibly clear one big meta team weakness, and that is the burn effect, which makes her thorns go up in flames. And so that is why Sleeping Beauty is joining the SS tier and not higher. And honestly, I'm not super optimistic about her going any higher than that because of that huge burn weakness. Kind of keeping her in the back is probably the best you can do in many cases. Hoping that the fire has died down at that point, but yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to go for her. For her, right now, she is in the SS tier together, for example, with Commander Astrid. But on the other hand, interestingly, still holding on, still going strong, we have Lancelot. And Lancelot is at 83% usage. She barely lost any true power compared to last time. Still over 7 million. She is going to the SS tier, staying there for now, even though the stun immunity has been rising, even though a lot of things aren't exactly going in Lancelot's favor. But now that we see some of these Ursa units being pushed back again, there is a bit of hope again for her. And also, I mean, the deadly momentum and all of that is still a really, really nice skill. The problem is with the Hold Ground Plus units around, it is much more difficult. But one of the fun things about Lancelot is definitely if you are up against a player that has a bit weaker units, then she can absolutely steamroll an enemy team in no time. And I'm not sure if that is part of the reason why a lot of these top players still use her, but she definitely still has a right to that SS tier spot according to the data. And the same is true for Earth Mysha, but for her this is actually a little downfall in comparison to the last edition. She is no longer in the top tier, and with that I think an era actually comes to an end. I'm not sure how much of her legacy will be overshadowed by any of these newer units, given the current kind of fast pace of the meta changes. It is actually pretty incredible how long she stayed in the top tier, and even now she still is in SS tier. She still is at 90% usage, and even with the kind of burn meta, which of course isn't super nice for her, she still has, with that kind of stealthy vengeance passive, some good chances of staying alive and doing a lot of damage with her double attacks. And that is why I think she is still in the SS tier, even though she lost quite a bit of true power. And another old unit that is still holding on to that SS tier, is still performing enormously great with the highest usage rate by far at this point of any unit in the game. 99% usage for Bright Ludmilla, the Water Guard with the 100% Auto Guard passive, and also with that kind of Shield of Eldine that makes her indestructible for a set amount of time. And the one thing that is also extremely helpful for her and keeping her, I think, relevant quite a bit is the Rise of Fire, which has an elemental disadvantage against her. So for example, the Guard Incinerator from Commander Astrid that a lot of these other guards definitely have to fear, because they basically oftentimes can just die against. For Bright Ludmilla, if you are in a somewhat even matchup, this is no problem for her at all, oftentimes just taking off maybe 50% of HP or something like that. So Bright Ludmilla with the water element, with the auto guard, still in SS tier. And now we get to the top 3, and now we get to the SSS tier, and first we see join the number 3, Light Anya, another 100% guard. She also lost quite a bit of power. She's still holding on to that SSS tier anyways, but of course with releases like Sleeping Beauty, even like Cinderella, we just see a lot of units that can dish out massive damage, and then even the Endure of Light Anya may not be able to save her. I mean, still, the mechanic is really kind of great at first with the 375% heals that she gets at the start, with the endure that she unlocks every time kind of that she stays alive and it isn't triggered or activated yet. And so there's still a lot of good things about Light Anya for sure, and she is a 100% guard. We see time and time again that these 100% guards have the best long-term return on investment, I suppose, because they are just staying relevant for so much longer than all the DPS that we saw around. That said, if you are a new and starting player, guards obviously aren't your first concern. You should definitely go for some of these other units first, one of which of course is Storm Jeanne, who is that really kind of all-in-one package if you want. Yes, she can dish out some great damage in combination with her sister Storm Michaela in certain cases, but even more important is her kind of support, is her survival stun, is that kind of revival cycle with Storm Michaela, who can reset other units as she wants. And obviously that kind of 100% guard, I think, is very, very big with Storm Michaela, because until she gets her turn, she will not be defeated. And so she's kind of like Bright Ludmilla, Shield of Eldine at her entry. And for example, that can tank a few of the super strong burn shots if you have to. And so, yeah, that is why 88% usage for Storm Jeanne. She's number 2. And at number 1, we see a new unit immediately going there. It is Cinderella. Light Cinderella, as I mentioned in the beginning, she just has that kind of insane damage output. On the one hand, we have the Hypnoblast, which is already quite incredible of a skill, just 50 time units, and the idea of having quite a high chance, like 25% probability of actually putting the opponent to sleep. And then in combination with her passives, which is that kind of Veil Breaker, which gives her another turn if she attacks stealthed or armored units, then, you know, she can get off so many of these Hypnoblasts. And so it's really strong. And then on top of all that, you have the kind of Survivor's Storm, which is one time unit, only locked for 50 time units. And I mean, yeah, after that initial 300 time units, she can just go back and forth between the Hypnoblast and the Survivor's Storm if she has some spirit, but it's not even that high, honestly. I mean, 2 spirit for the Survivor's Storm is actually insane, and that it is just locked for 50 time units, I think, is kind of crazy. And one more great thing about her in the AI is that she has little way to actually screw up her skills, so the AI can do little wrong with her skill set. I mean, she has 2 ways to kind of reset her Hold Ground Plus yet again, and that lends itself to very great survivability. Also, her Survivor Storm unlocks the Endure effect every time, so there's just not much that she can do wrong. Of course, the Calamity Phoenix, which resets her Hold Ground Plus with the 1000% damage, of course only usable once, but already super strong skill. And even if she doesn't have enough spirit to use that one, she still has a fallback with the kind of Flip Banish Plus, which reduces spirit, which can be used anytime in battle, because even if it's late in the battle, she will just replace some of these other units with imposters on the enemy team. And so what I want to say, I guess, is that she's really this kind of plug and play unit, fitting pretty much in every single team. You can run her in burn, you can run her in sleep, you can run her just about everywhere, and she will do a great job. And she's also a great unit just for that kind of platoon 1 usage, which is also important because it's setting up the battle and the battle dynamics. And yeah, great survivability, insane damage output. All that coming together with very little visible weaknesses, and that one weakness that I mentioned earlier is kind of Sleeping Beauty, because of that cursed sleep mechanic, which could hinder you from, could hinder her from actually using these skills to stay alive, because if she is having that cursed sleep and the hold ground plus vanishes on her turn where she is asleep, then she is obviously in trouble and easily picked off. What's good for her though is that Sleeping Beauty has that struggle against burn, and so if you run Cinderella in a burn platoon, for example, then even Sleeping Beauty cannot do anything against Cinderella. Of course, Cinderella is not stun immune, so that is a slight disadvantage, but given her skill set, that is not that big of an issue. Of course, it would be nicer if she gets her turns permanently, but if she gets stunned and still has the hold ground plus status around, there is really little for her to worry about, and then she will come back eventually to haunt you or the enemy team, depending on the situation. So yeah, that's why Cinderella currently number 1, filling out that tier list now at the SSS tier with these 3 top units. But as always, the other tiers are also very, very good up until B, I would say. Personally, I, as always, would recommend you to not pull for any units below the B tier, except for fellowships. I just realized I've been talking for a very, very long time, so this might be a quite long video in the end, but I hope you enjoyed these insights. There you have it now, the new Evertale Arena tier list based on data with all these kind of top servers from Japan, from Asia in general, from Europe, from the Americas. And as always, I put a lot of effort in these videos. Over 12 hours go into this production, so it would really mean a lot to me if you could hit that like button and subscribe to my small channel. Thanks to all of you, your support keeps me going and motivated. And as always, thanks for watching.